After playing about an hour of this game, I was left in a very confusing spot. Not because I didn't like it, and absolutely not because it was difficult. It's more of a case of it's not quite what I expected. From the outside, Thymesia looks to be a Souls-like game which takes its inspiration from and most closely resembles Bloodborne. In a number of different ways, that is kind of what you get, but in reality the mechanics are far closer to Sekiro's Shadows Die Twice, another well-respected From Software title. That, in and of itself, is not a bad thing at all. Sekiro is an incredible game, and I think most people would agree with that. However, I think that this may cause an issue for some players, myself included. From what I understand, a lot of people out there found Sekiro to be too punishing and too difficult when compared to the standard Souls formula. So if you go into this game looking for Bloodborne only to find Sekiro, it might land the wrong way with you. Despite myself being a Souls veteran who's beaten all of the Souls games multiple times, I was never able to click with Sekiro even though I loved it. It's a game that demands a lot from the player, and frankly, I simply wasn't good enough at it. Unfortunately, the same is true with Thymesia. I think the game is genuinely rather good, but as someone who couldn't handle Sekiro, this did end up being a little bit of a struggle. So what is Thymesia? Well, it's a challenging action RPG with a gothic Victorian aesthetic and fast deflection-based combat mechanics. I'm sure that anyone who's familiar with the Souls games will understand what's going on here, but as I said a moment ago, Thymesia shares a lot more of its DNA with Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. The best way to think of it would probably be Sekiro's gameplay combined with Bloodborne's visuals. The game does of course have some of its own ideas and mechanics, but that's pretty much what it is. The story and the overarching narrative are very sparsely presented, as is common with games of this type, told mainly through notes and interactable objects throughout the world. You play as Corvus, a man with a decorated background in alchemical science. The kingdom of Hermes has fallen to a deadly plague, mutating some of its citizens and just outright killing thousands of others. Corvus has the unenviable task of finding a cure which can hopefully rid the kingdom of this plague once and for all. When the game first begins, you'll be dropped into a tutorial level which will teach you the basics and give you a taste of what's to come. As you might imagine, the tutorial level does have a customary difficult boss at the end of it which can be beaten if you're good enough. In general though, most players are supposed to die here, and the animation that plays is the same regardless of if you win or if you lose. I believe there is an achievement and trophy tied to it, but I don't think you get any in-game items or anything like that. After you've got through the tutorial, the game is then split into two main sections. Firstly, you've got the hub area where you can find lore notes and select the level that you wish to play. The second main section is actually the levels themselves. They're all self-contained, and the way that you interact with them is virtually the same as in Demon Souls. There is no interconnected spaces like in Dark Souls or a massive open world like in Elden Ring. You simply select the level that you wish to play, and then once you complete it or decide to leave early, you'll be placed back in the hub area. Corvus is unfortunately suffering from amnesia, and selecting these levels to play represents Corvus trying to recall past events. He's trying to remember what happened up until his loss in the tutorial boss fight. This is important because his memories are the key to uncovering the roots of the plague. Each level that you explore is set out in much the same way as other Souls-like games. It's almost like a gauntlet, leading you through standard enemies, mini-bosses, and a final confrontation with a main boss at the end. There are of course a lot of lore notes to discover and shortcuts to unlock throughout each stage. During your grueling adventures, you'll be gathering memory shards from defeated enemies. These memory shards are this game's version of souls, runes, or blood echoes. In other words, they represent XP, and as you probably already guessed, they are dropped upon death and they must be recovered without dying again in order to be saved. At various intervals, you'll stumble upon these glowing chairs made of small, interwoven tree branches. These are called beacons, and they act as this game's version of a checkpoint, which pretty much everyone calls a bonfire at this point. Resting at these beacons allows Corvus to recover all health and healing items, as well as level up and tinker with your loadout. Spending your memory shards on leveling up in this game isn't as complex as you might first expect. In Thymesia, you only have 3 stats to think about, which are Strength, Vitality, and Plague. To simplify things a little bit, Strength relates to your saber damage, Vitality relates to your maximum health, and Plague defines your plague damage and maximum energy. This is important to note as this game takes a rather unique approach to the damage that you deal. In the gameplay, you'll notice that all enemies start off with a white health bar, and then when they take a hit, it reveals a green bar underneath. Your saber deals damage exclusively to that white bar, and if you stop dealing damage for a short period of time, the white bar will regenerate. So what you need to do is attack the enemy with your saber using R1, which will reveal the green bar. Then you need to hit the enemy with a Plague Claw attack using R2, which will actually deplete the green bar. The white bar can only regen up to the level of the green bar, meaning that every chunk you take off of the green bar lowers that enemy's maximum health. On lower tier enemies this really doesn't matter too much, you can simply overpower them, but it is the key to victory with mini bosses and even more so with main bosses. I know it sounds very convoluted and long-winded, but in practice, from moment to moment, it makes a lot of sense and it's a quick process. All of the combat actions that you can see in the gameplay do not require the use of stamina. You can dodge, attack, deflect and move as much as you want with no penalty. The only real limitations are the animations and the length of the combos. You start off only being able to attack a few times before needing to stop, but you can unlock longer combo strings as you progress and level up. The dodging mechanics in the game are based on a quick step variant, meaning that you won't be dodge rolling. Ideally, the dodges are meant to be used for repositioning and avoiding specific attacks. This is because that, very much like Sekiro, you're supposed to get up in the enemy's face, learn their attacks, deflect them, and then counterattack. By tapping L1 just as the enemy's attack is about to land, you can deflect the blow which will deal some damage back to that enemy. Learning this skill is the key to success in this game, and most of the encounters are designed around mastering this technique. Speaking of techniques, the game doesn't actually include any lootable gear or equipable weapons. Instead, it features multiple talent trees for you to upgrade. It's worth noting that you won't be locked into anything on this screen, and you can unlearn any skill at any time in order to put the point into something else. There's a good amount of talents to try out, and they're split into 6 categories, which are Saber, Deflect, Dodge, Claw, Feather, and Strategies. Obviously, I won't be going over every single option here, but you can increase damage, unlock new moves, apply some buffs, add attacks to your combos, and quite a few more things besides. Choosing to take some skills will actually lock off others, but as I said, you can change them up whenever you want, so it is worth experimenting to see what works for you. Another offensive option you have at your disposal are plague weapons. As you proceed through the early game, you'll unlock the ability to equip a plague weapon. To obtain a plague weapon, you'll need to find shards of the weapon which can be looted from the enemies who wield it. So for example, a basic enemy that holds a plague knife will drop plague knife skill shards, and once you have enough, you can unlock and equip the weapon. Plague weapons all require energy to use, which is the green bar below your white health bar. I suppose you can think of them as a special attack with limited uses, sort of like weapon arts in Dark Souls 3 or Ashes of War in Elden Ring. The plague weapons that you unlock are available for use at any time so long as you have the energy to activate it, but you can also extract a single-use version from most enemies in the game. If you hold down R2, which is the Plague Claw, you can absorb a one-use version of the plague weapon upon a successful hit. In a lot of the gameplay you'll see me using the Plague Hammer, but there are quite a few more to obtain. There's also a separate Forgotten Feather item that acts as a ranged attack that can interrupt certain enemy skills. You can use it to get the aggro of a single enemy, kill a weak enemy from a safe distance, or, as I said, interrupt an enemy attack when they glow green. It doesn't always work on the bigger enemies, but it stops weaker creatures in their tracks and usually staggers them. The feathers don't do a whole lot of damage, but they do regenerate after a short time, and they can be upgraded at the beacons. And lastly, let's quickly go over healing and potions. This game, like most games in the genre, feature a limited number of healing items which regen when you rest at a checkpoint. At first you'll be given 3 general healing potions by default, but as you progress and take down important enemies, you'll gain new types of potions and the ability to upgrade them. You can increase the total amount that you can carry, their potency, and even unlock an ingredient slot that allows you to add bonus effects to them, which will activate when consumed. Thymesia is available now on PS5, Xbox Series consoles, PC, and Nintendo Switch via the cloud version. Also, standard physical copies are available for PS5 and Xbox Series X. So what did I personally think of Thymesia? Well, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm just so, torn and completely confused by it. I don't think I've ever struggled through a game this much, been so utterly bad at it, and still thought it was great. Although, now that I think about it, that is exactly how I felt about Sekiro. So I guess if I'm honest, the long and short of it is that I genuinely like the game, but I'm just really bad at it. This is the thing though, I've beaten Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3, Bloodborne and Elden Ring, plus all of the applicable DLCs. And I'll be honest, I genuinely find them pretty easy at this point. That isn't some sort of brag, it's just that I've played so much of it and I just find it to be, just sort of second nature now, I guess. I mean, in my entire first playthrough of Elden Ring, I died less than 25 times, and half of those were on Radahn before he was nerfed. In Thymesia though, I died more than 25 times on the first major boss alone. After putting many hours into the game and looking at my footage, the problem is absolutely my timing on the deflections. I don't know what it is, I just cannot seem to get the hang of it, and it was the same problem that caused me to stop playing Sekiro. It's a shame as well because I really do like both games in a lot of ways. I mean, as a Souls fan, it's kind of hard not to, if I'm honest. I genuinely think a lot of people are going to be in the same boat here as well. I'd say that Souls games are pretty much mainstream now, but Sekiro is generally considered to be the most difficult From Software game. So with that in mind, I think people will pick this up due to the fact that it looks a lot like Bloodborne and may get a rude awakening when they realize it's actually Sekiro in a Bloodborne facade. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but when you're not expecting it, it could be like running face first into a brick wall for a lot of people. I don't think the game looks anywhere near as good as Bloodborne from an artistic point of view, but it runs a hell of a lot better, that's for sure. On PS5, I was getting a consistent 60 FPS with only a few minor hiccups, and it targets 4K with dynamic resolution scaling, so I can't really ask for much more than that. I think Thymesia does have a decent atmosphere to it, and considering that it's an indie game sold at a very low asking price, it seems very well done to me. Some corners were obviously cut in terms of visuals and the amount of content it offers, but again, for the price, it's really hard to complain. Depending on how difficult you find the game, it can be beaten in around 9 to 12 hours, with 100% completion clocking in at somewhere between 20 to 22 hours. Funnily enough, I actually bought the physical copy of the game with my own money on release day and started playing it that way. Then about maybe 4 days after release, a representative from Team 17 got in touch with me and offered me a code with no requirements. I wasn't actually under any obligation to use this code for a review, but I wanted to be professional and be respectful and do something with the code I was given, so here we are. As far as I understand it, they were apparently just late in replying due to being at Gamescom, which a lot of companies were attending at the time, so I completely understand that. But yeah, the game itself is honestly really well done, and I am definitely going to keep practicing. I really do want to get better at the deflection stuff, and despite me being awful at it, I do really think it's got to be one of the best Souls-like games you can currently buy. I mean, besides the combat, the setting and the story are relatively intriguing, and the underlying mechanics are a stroke of genius. A lot of the unique systems that Thymesia brings to the table are incredibly simple, but they have such a large impact on the gameplay. Having the white and green health bars that you can only deplete using the correct attacks keeps you engaged and encourages you to play aggressively. You can hit the enemies as much as you want with your saber, but if you don't keep up the pressure, it will regen and effectively negate what you've done up to that point. It works really well and it keeps you playing proactively, and I think it's a very clever little system. It's also worth pointing out that while the music is really quite good, the game does not feature any voice acting except for the grunts and groans of battle. It's a bit disappointing and it would have added so much personality to the game, but then again, voice acting is expensive, so I do understand the choice. Character movement feels generally pretty good, I had no issues with it, but I did have one camera bug when climbing certain ladders. I didn't actually manage to record any of it, but the camera sometimes spins in circles while you climb specific ladders, even though you're not touching the controls. It's definitely a bit odd, but it's not really what I'd call an issue. Other than that, I encountered no problems, bugs, or glitches during my playthrough. In my opinion, Thymesia is a top-tier indie game that offers players a strong challenge at a very reasonable price. It may not have it all in the looks department and the amount of content may be lacking, but I don't think that means the game isn't worth playing. In fact, I'd say the opposite is true, especially if you're a fan of Sekiro and/or the souls-borne series. When an indie studio produces a solid and well-constructed game such as this, I think they should be praised and highlighted. There was obviously a very clear and concise vision driving the creation of this game, and it shows in almost every aspect of the final product. Ultimately, you need to go into this game with the understanding that it will require you to play in a certain way, and the learning curve will be a bit more steep than most players will be used to. Learning to deflect enemy attacks is essential, and trust me when I say the game will punish you for getting it wrong. That said, if you're looking for a good challenge after Elden Ring, I think that this game is absolutely worth considering. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.